Before history learned how to hurry, before time was measured in minutes or profit, there was a long age when the world moved slowly and nothing felt the need to explain itself. Imagine a night so calm that even the wind seemed unsure whether it should exist. In that quiet, long before cities had names, the Greeks believed the universe began, not with thunder, not with light, but with something far less dramatic. They called it chaos. Chaos was not disorder. It was not destruction. It was simply space, wide and empty, patient and silent. No sky above, no ground below, no sound asking to be heard. And for a very long time, chaos was enough. From that stillness, without intention or struggle, the earliest forms appeared. Gaia, the earth, did not rise with force. She simply was, solid, heavy, calm. She did not speak. She did not move quickly. She existed the way mountains exist, without apology. Above her came Uranus, the sky, stretching endlessly. Between them, space became structured, not because anyone planned it, but because time itself tends to organize what it touches. Together, Gaia and Uranus produced the Titans, not gods of lightning or fire, but ancient beings tied to inevitability. Oceanus was water without waves. Hyperion was light without brilliance. Mnemosyne was memory without emotion. These were not dramatic beings. They did not crave worship. They did not seek attention. They embodied constants, and constants are boring in the most peaceful way. One of these titans was Cronus. Cronus was not evil by design. He was careful, slow, suspicious of change. His father Uranus feared his children, not because they threatened him, but because they represented the future, and the future always replaces the present. Gaia, endlessly patient, eventually grew tired of seeing her children pushed back into the earth, hidden, delayed, denied their turn to exist fully. So she gave Cronus a tool, not a weapon of rage, but of transition. Cronus did what history often does quietly. He replaced what came before. And when Uranus was gone from power, the universe did not explode. It settled. Cronus ruled during what humans would later call the Golden Age. There were no laws because there was no crime, no clocks because there was no urgency. Humans, new, fragile beings, lived without knowing fear or ambition. They aged gently and faded without pain. Sleep came easily in those days. Cronus married Rhea, another Titan, steady and calm. But the memory of his father never fully left him. He remembered the prophecy whispered by the earth itself, that one of his own children would someday replace him. And fear, once introduced, tends to repeat. So when his children were born, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, Cronus did something unimaginative but effective. He swallowed them. Not violently, not angrily, simply efficiently, as though postponing an inconvenience. Rhea endured this quietly until the sixth child, Zeus. Instead of confrontation, Rhea chose strategy. She wrapped a stone in cloth and gave it to Cronus, who swallowed it without inspection. The real child was hidden on the island of Crete, raised not with glory, but with caution. Zeus grew without knowing luxury. Nymphs fed him. Goats provided milk. His cries were masked by rhythmic noise, soldiers clashing shields, not for war, but for silence. When Zeus matured, he did not rush. He observed. He waited. Time favors patience. Eventually, Cronus was made to release what he had consumed. The gods returned, unchanged, eternal, unbothered by time spent inside their father. What followed is often called the Titanomachy, but even that great conflict was less dramatic than later poets would suggest. It lasted 10 years, not because of chaos, but because immortals have no reason to hurry. Mountains were moved, seas shifted, but the universe did not scream. In the end, Zeus and his siblings ruled, not because they were better, but because succession is natural. The Titans were not destroyed, they were placed, some in Tartarus, some in the ocean, some into obscurity. History tends to forget what no longer resists. Zeus became king, not as a revolutionary, but as a manager of balance. He divided the world carefully. Poseidon received the sea, Hades received the underworld, Zeus kept the sky, not out of vanity, but because someone had to watch everything at once. Olympus was not a palace of indulgence, it was an administrative center of reality. Hera oversaw marriage, not love, but structure. Demeter governed agriculture, not beauty, but continuity. Hestia tended the hearth, the quiet center of every home. These gods were not superheroes, they were systems, and systems are soothing. Humans came later, shaped not with perfection, but with forgetfulness. Prometheus gave them fire, not to create weapons, but to stay warm, to cook slowly, to gather. Fire extended the day. Sleep became intentional. Zeus punished Prometheus, not of cruelty, but precedent, bound him to a rock where an eagle consumed his liver daily. Pain, yes, but also regeneration, a cycle. The Greeks understood cycles deeply. Night followed day, summer followed winter, power followed age. Nothing lasted forever, and nothing needed to. Heroes would come later, wars would come later, drama would come later. But in this early age, the world was still learning how to breathe. Rivers flowed without names, mountains stood without stories, stars moved without interpretation, and humans, fragile and brief, lived under gods who did not demand urgency. They slept, not because they were tired, but because the world allowed it. And far above them, on Olympus, the gods watched, not with concern, but with patience, knowing that everything eventually settles. After the gods arranged the sky, the sea, and the unseen world below, there was a long stretch of time where nothing remarkable happened. This is often skipped in retellings because nothing dramatic announces itself during such ages. But to the ancient Greeks, these quiet periods mattered most. They believed that meaning did not arrive through sudden events, but through repetition, through days that resembled one another so closely they felt eternal. Humans lived during this time without recording anything, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they felt no pressure to remember. Memory was not yet a survival tool. Seasons returned on schedule, the earth provided without negotiation, sleep came without fear of tomorrow. The gods did not visit often. When they did not reveal themselves in light or thunder. They passed through dreams, through intuition, through patterns that repeated often enough to be trusted. Prometheus watched humans carefully. Unlike Zeus, who saw humanity as a developing variable in a vast system, Prometheus saw them as unfinished, not broken, simply incomplete. They walked upright but hesitated. They spoke but forgot. They survived but barely understood how. Fire had helped, but fire alone did not create progress. What humans lacked was anticipation, the ability to imagine tomorrow. So Prometheus taught them small things: how to stack stones so they would not fall, how to dry meat so it would last, how to look at the sky and notice repetition. These were not gifts of brilliance, they were instructions in patience. As humans began to plan, Zeus began to notice, not with anger, with calculation. The gods had always existed without needing the future. Humans, however, were learning to store time, to prepare for what was not yet present. This made them unpredictable. Zeus decided not to remove fire. That would undo too much. Instead, he introduced balance. He asked Hephaestus, the god of craft, to create something beautiful and slow. Her name was Pandora. Pandora was not a punishment in the modern sense. She was a correction. She carried curiosity, not recklessness, but interest, attention directed outward. When Pandora arrived among humans, nothing bad happened immediately. Life continued as it always had. Fields grew, children slept, the sky remained unchanged. The jar she carried was not tempting because it promised pleasure, but because it represented the unknown, and humans had only just learned how to imagine that. When the jar was opened, what escaped were not monsters, they were conditions: illness, aging, uncertainty, effort. These were not designed to destroy humanity, but to give it dimension. Without difficulty, time feels flat. With struggle, moments separate themselves. Hope remained inside, not as a reward, but as a stabilizer. From that moment on, humans remembered. They remembered pain. They remembered loss. They remembered yesterday. And memory changed sleep. Dreams became crowded, not frightening, just busy. Images layered over one another. Thoughts continued after sunset. The gods observed this without interference. Demeter, however, noticed something else. Humans had begun to fear winter. Previously, the cold was simply another phase. Now it was an obstacle, something to prepare for, something to survive. Demeter, whose domain was growth through routine, responded quietly. She taught humans agriculture, not suddenly, but gradually. Observation became practice. Practice became tradition. Grain replaced foraging. Storage replaced wandering. Settlements formed not from ambition, but from convenience. The first villages were unremarkable. A few stone structures, fires that burned low, paths worn into the ground by habit rather than planning. With villages came shared time. People woke together, slept together, waited together. This was new. Hera, observing from Olympus, recognized structure when she saw it. Marriage emerged not from romance, but from alignment. Two people sharing labor, sleep, and expectation. Love came later. As human life became layered, the gods became more distant, not because they withdrew, but because humans had more to think about. Zeus did not mind this. Gods, after all, do not need attention to exist. But with memory came comparison, and with comparison came dissatisfaction. Some humans began to look at the sky not for weather, but for meaning. This is when myth began, not as fantasy, but as explanation. Stories were not told to entertain, but to soothe, to turn randomness into sequence, to make long nights feel shorter. Parents spoke of gods so children could sleep without fear of the dark. Elders spoke of fate so loss felt organized. Even the gods themselves became simpler in these stories, more human, more predictable. This amused them. Sleep changed again. Dreams now carried narratives, not chaos, but repetition. Familiar figures doing familiar things,
Gods argued, humans struggled, order returned. And in the quiet between these stories, something else began to grow. Ambition. Not hunger, not survival, the desire to be remembered. This concerned the fates. The Moirai, Clothos, Lachesis, and Atropos had always woven life without urgency. Length, quality, end, simple, balanced. But now humans were trying to extend their threads. They built, they marked stones, they named places. Time, once a river, was becoming segmented. The fates adjusted their work without complaint. Threads thickened, lives lengthened slightly, complexity increased, but balance was still maintained. Far away, on the edge of the known world, something ancient stirred. Not a monster, not a god, but a memory of older forces. The earth, Gaia, still watched. She had seen cycles before. She had felt rebellion and succession. She knew this pattern. Humanity was entering its loud phase. But for now, the nights were still mostly quiet. Stars remained fixed, seasons returned. And despite their new worries, humans still slept. Not as deeply as before, but deeply enough.
Before heroes learned to shout their names into history, there was a time when monsters existed without spectacle. They did not roam in search of victims. They remained where they were placed, at the edges of understanding. Mountains, caves, distant seas. They were not created to inspire terror, but to contain uncertainty. The Greeks did not imagine monsters as accidents. Each one answered a question that had not yet learned how to form itself. Why do ships disappear beyond the horizon? Why do storms arrive without warning? Why do some places feel watched, even when empty? Typhon was not chaos. He was excess, what happens when forces grow without structure. His defeat by Zeus was not a battle of good versus evil, but a lesson in containment. Wildness must exist, but not everywhere. Echidna, half woman, half serpent, did not stalk humans. She produced offspring, concepts given shape. Her children were localized fears, placed carefully into the world so they would not spread. Cerberus did not guard the underworld to keep souls inside. He guarded it to keep the living out. Death was not forbidden, but premature curiosity was discouraged. Medusa was once human. This detail mattered. Her transformation was not meant as punishment alone, but as warning. Power without preparation hardens perception. Those who looked at her turned to stone, not because she attacked them, but because they looked too directly at something they did not yet know how to process. Perseus, when he came, did not defeat Medusa by strength. He avoided direct observation, reflection, distance, indirection. The Greeks valued this lesson. Knowledge approached too directly can immobilize. Heroes in their earliest form were not conquerors, they were problem solvers. Heracles did not destroy the Nemean lion out of glory. He removed a persistent threat. Each labor was geographic, specific, and final. Once completed, balance returned. No empire was built from these deeds. No dynasty followed. These stories existed not to elevate individuals, but to reassure communities that problems had boundaries. As generations passed, monsters became rarer, not because they vanished, but because understanding expanded. What had once required a creature now required a story. Why does the earth shake? Poseidon shifts his weight. Why does drought arrive? Demeter mourns. Why does love distract? Aphrodite passes by. The gods became shorthand, and as shorthand developed, memory solidified. Humans began to write, not to record facts, but to preserve explanations.
Oral tradition slowed, words fixed themselves into place. This changed the nature of myth. Once written, stories resist adjustment. They stop evolving with each telling. They become objects. The gods noticed. Apollo, god of prophecy and order, favored this development. He preferred clarity. He liked lines drawn cleanly. He inspired poets to organize chaos into meter. Dionysus did not. Dionysus represented what happens when structure loosens. Wine, dance, release. Not excess, but temporary forgetting. His followers did not seek destruction. They sought silence inside noise, a way to return, briefly, to the world before memory became heavy. Both gods were necessary. Sleep itself balanced between them. Apollo governed dreams with meaning. Dionysus allowed dreams without logic. As human settlements grew into cities, nights grew louder. Fires burned longer. Conversations extended. Sleep shortened. This concerned Hypnos, the god of sleep, who had always worked quietly. He did not demand rituals. He arrived when the world slowed. Now the world resisted slowing. Hypnos adjusted. He sent deeper sleep in shorter intervals. Dreams became denser. Rest compressed. People woke tired but functional. The gods did not intervene further. History, once it begins, prefers to continue without supervision. Heroes began to change. They sought not balance, but remembrance. Names mattered now. This was the age just before war stories took over, before Achilles, before Troy, a transitional period where strength and wisdom still competed for dominance. Some heroes chose wisdom, others chose speed. The gods watched without preference. Fate would handle the rest. At night, when cities finally quieted, when lamps dimmed, when conversations surrendered to fatigue, the old stories returned. Not loudly, in fragments. A mountain that felt too large, a sea that seemed to listen, a dream that lingered after waking. Monsters no longer appeared, but their function remained. They reminded humans where not to look too closely. And beneath it all, Gaia remained steady. She had seen this before. She will see it again.
Long before the Trojan War was remembered as a single story, it existed as a collection of delays. Nothing began suddenly. Paris did not wake one morning intending to alter history. Helen did not plan to become symbolic. Even the gods, whose names would later fill the margins of epic poems, approached the conflict with administrative patience rather than excitement. The disagreement began quietly, as many large events do, with a judgment that seemed small. At a wedding meant to unify, Eris, the embodiment of discord, introduced an object rather than an argument, a golden apple marked only with the words, "To the fairest." She did not explain, she did not stay. Explanations create urgency. Ambiguity creates longevity. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite did not fight immediately. They considered. They weighed influence, precedent, and outcome. Zeus declined involvement, not out of fear, but because neutrality preserves structure. Paris was chosen not for wisdom, but for distance. A shepherd removed from power evaluates differently. Each goddess offered something predictable. Hera promised stability through authority. Athena offered excellence through skill. Aphrodite suggested connection through desire. Paris chose the offer that felt personal rather than political. This choice did not cause the war. It revealed the conditions already present. Helen's departure from Sparta was not violent. It was quiet. She left not with urgency, but with curiosity. History often mislabels curiosity as betrayal. Menelaus responded not with immediate violence, but with obligation. Treaties existed, alliances mattered, honor was procedural. And so the armies gathered slowly. Ships were built deliberately, supplies counted, sacrifices made not for success, but for permission. Even the gods waited. When the war finally began, it did not resemble constant battle. Days passed without conflict. Weeks settled into routine. Soldiers learned the terrain. They slept. They waited. This was not a war of chaos. It was a war of endurance. Achilles, often remembered for speed and rage, spent much of the war inactive. His withdrawal lasted longer than his fighting. His presence was symbolic before it was practical. Hector, defender of Troy, was not driven by glory. He acted from responsibility. He understood that the city did not need a hero. It needed someone who would not leave. The gods intervened selectively, not to decide outcomes, but to maintain balance. Apollo sent illness to remind humans of limits. Athena guided strategy to reward planning. Ares stirred conflict where stagnation grew too heavy. No god attempted to end the war quickly. Length was part of the design. The war lasted 10 years, not because victory was difficult, but because closure required time. Humans needed to experience the cost of prolonged desire. When Troy finally fell, it did not collapse under force. It yielded through misinterpretation. The horse was not a trick born of brilliance. It was an act of exhaustion. Both sides wanted the war to end. Troy accepted the horse not from foolishness, but from hope. Hope, when tired, lowers caution. The city slept. Sleep has always been vulnerable. When the war ended, there was no celebration that lasted. Survivors returned home altered. Some never returned at all. Odysseus wandered not because he was cursed, but because returning to a place unchanged after prolonged absence is difficult. Home moves on. The gods receded again. They had supervised enough. What followed was not peace, but reflection. Poets began organizing memory into verse. The Iliad did not record events. It shaped them. It slowed them. It allowed listeners to process what had taken too long to understand while it was happening. War stories became cautionary. Sleep once again changed. Dreams filled with journeys rather than battles, delays rather than victories. The age of myth was ending, not abruptly, but gradually. Humans were learning to explain the world without monsters, without gods intervening daily. Questions became internal. Why do we choose? Why do we persist? Why does time change us? These questions did not require Olympus. They required thought. And so, quietly, philosophy began. After the long war and the even longer returns, the world did not feel empty, but it felt quieter. The gods had not disappeared. They had simply learned that constant involvement was no longer necessary. Humans were now capable of carrying questions without immediate answers, and this was a significant development. Cities resumed their rhythms, markets opened, children grew without hearing battle stories every night. Time, which had been stretched thin by war, slowly returned to its natural pace. It was during this period that people began to look inward. Before, explanations arrived from above or beyond, storms caused by gods, fortune shaped by fate, misfortune assigned meaning through myth. Now a different habit formed. People began to ask why, without expecting a voice to respond. This did not alarm the gods. Athena, whose domain included wisdom, observed this with interest. Thought, after all, was simply strategy applied internally. The first philosophers were not disruptors, they were observers. Thales watched water and concluded that everything flowed from a single principle. Anaximander noticed balance and imagined an infinite source. Heraclitus listened to contradiction and accepted that change itself was fundamental. These were not declarations of rebellion against the gods, they were refinements. The universe, once populated with personalities, was becoming patterned. Sleep adapted again. Instead of dreaming of figures and stories, people began dreaming of shapes, arguments, sequences. The mind rehearsed ideas the way it once rehearsed myths. Socrates appeared not as a revolutionary, but as a presence that slowed conversation. He did not teach answers, he extended questions. He allowed silence to linger. This unsettled some, calmed others. The gods did not intervene when he was sentenced. His death was not a failure of divine protection. It was an acknowledgement. Humans had reached a point where meaning could survive without constant reassurance. Plato, watching this, preserved ideas the way earlier poets preserved myths. Dialogues replaced epics. Characters replaced gods. Truth became something approached, not delivered. Aristotle organized knowledge the way Zeus once organized domains. Categorization replaced divine jurisdiction. The world became understandable without becoming smaller. The gods adapted. They became metaphors. Aphrodite lived on as attraction, Ares as conflict, Demeter as cycles, Hypnos as rest. They no longer needed temples, they lived in language. This did not weaken them, it preserved them. As centuries passed, Greek myths were told not as belief, but as reference. Rome borrowed them, scholars analyzed them, children heard them softened. They became calm stories, stories for sleep, not because they were dull, but because they were familiar, reassuring, structured. In this way, the myths achieved something rare. They did not vanish, they settled. Like the sea after a long storm, like the mind when it finally stops searching for urgency. And somewhere beneath the surface of every modern thought, they remain, not loud, not demanding, just present, waiting. As Greek ideas spread beyond the hills and coastlines where they were first spoken, they did not resist change, they adapted. When Rome encountered Greek myths, it did not replace them, it translated them. Names shifted, temperaments softened or hardened slightly. The gods became less personal, more civic. Zeus became Jupiter, not less powerful, but more distant. Authority over intimacy, order over personality. Athena became Minerva, no longer a companion to heroes, but a symbol of rational governance. Ares became Mars, more disciplined, less chaotic. The Romans were not interested in divine drama. They preferred function. Myth became infrastructure. Temples aligned with law. Rituals synchronized with calendars. Stories supported stability rather than exploration. This suited the aging gods. They had grown comfortable with distance. As Rome expanded, myths traveled further, not carried by poets, but by roads. Soldiers, merchants, administrators brought familiar stories into unfamiliar places. The myths absorbed local details. Rivers gained names, mountains acquired personalities, gods accepted new epithets without protest. This was not dilution, it was endurance. Sleep in these regions grew deeper. Familiar stories create safety. Safety encourages rest. But as empires grow, they eventually tire. When Rome began to slow, it was not sudden. Roads remained, laws functioned, but belief thinned. New explanations arrived, single narratives, linear time, one beginning, one end. The old gods did not resist this shift. They had always existed alongside others,
Multiplicity was their nature. They receded further, not into absence, but into background. Monasteries replaced temples. Manuscripts replaced oral tradition. Myths were copied not as truth, but as heritage. Scholars preserved them with care, not urgency. Preservation itself is a form of respect. During the long medieval nights, these stories slept. They were not told often, but they were not forgotten. Sleep during this era was deep, heavy, uninterrupted by constant light. Candles burned low, silence returned. In dreams, fragments of old myths resurfaced. A winged figure, a distant sea, a familiar name without context. The mind remembers what culture sets aside. When the Renaissance arrived, it did not resurrect the gods, it remembered them. Artists painted Apollo not as a being, but as an ideal. Venus not as a goddess, but as proportion. Myths became lenses through which humans examined themselves. They no longer explained the world, they explained us. Sleep shortened again, cities grew louder, nights filled with thought. But myths remained useful, not as belief, but as a rhythm. They structured imagination. They offered recognizable shapes for recurring human experiences. Love, loss, pride, time. In the modern world, Greek myths do not demand attention. They wait. In libraries, in language, in metaphors spoken without awareness of origin. A Herculean task, an Achilles' heel, a Sisyphean effort. Each phrase carries centuries of calm repetition. This is how myths survive, not through worship, through familiarity. And when the day ends and the mind looks for something steady, something ancient, something that does not rush, these stories return, quietly, without insisting, and the world for a moment feels older and calmer.
The story of Odysseus is often told as an adventure, but that is a later interpretation. In its original form, it is a record of delay. When Odysseus left Troy, he did not carry urgency with him. The war was over. The need for cleverness had ended. What remained was distance, geographical, emotional, temporal. Home, once left, becomes theoretical. The sea accepted him slowly. The first islands did not threaten him, they merely postponed him. Hospitality extended longer than expected, meals stretched, days blended. This was the sea's method. At the land of the lotus eaters, nothing attacked, nothing resisted. The danger was comfort without memory. Some of his men forgot their purpose not through magic, but through relief. Odysseus remembered for them. Memory in this story is not heroic, it is burdensome. Cyclops came later, not as chaos, but as isolation. Polyphemus did not understand custom, he lived without reflection. Odysseus escaped not through strength, but through restraint, leaving without insisting on recognition. His name, withheld, protected him longer than any weapon. Circe did not imprison, she paused. Her island was structured, quiet, predictable. Men turned into animals not as punishment, but as simplification. Reduced needs, fewer decisions. Odysseus stayed a year. Time, when allowed, expands. The underworld visit was not frightening, it was administrative. Records consulted, futures reviewed. Tiresias spoke without urgency. Even the dead were patient. The sirens did not scream, they sang accurately, knowledge without context. Odysseus listened bound, not because the song was dangerous, but because understanding without preparation destabilizes movement. Scylla and Charybdis represented choice, not threat. Loss was inevitable.
Selection minimized damage. Calypso offered eternity. This was the longest delay. 7 years passed without consequence. No hunger, no aging, no future. Odysseus wept not from sadness, but from stagnation. Mortality, he realized, provides direction. When he finally returned to Ithaca, nothing demanded recognition. The house remained. The bed waited. Penelope delayed, not from doubt, but from habit. Recognition arrived slowly. Sleep returned. Odysseus's journey mattered not because of danger, but because of persistence without haste. It taught the Greeks something essential. Home is not a place, it is a pace, and once found, it allows rest.
By now, myths had slowed. They no longer insisted upon action, violence, or spectacle. Instead, they became a framework for understanding, a series of patterns that humans could follow gently, without haste. Each god began to exist less as a being and more as a principle. Zeus, once the sky's ruler and wielder of lightning, became a symbol of observation and balance. He does not strike, he watches. He reminds humans that authority can be steady, measured, and impartial. Decisions may wait. Power need not be rushed. Hera, previously insistent, became the embodiment of care over relationships, not passion, but constancy. She exists quietly, encouraging reliability in bonds, in promises, in the slow building of trust. Demeter, timeless in her cycles, illustrates patience and rhythm. Seasons repeat, crops grow and fall. Nothing is immediate. Time itself is her domain, and through her, humans learn to pace themselves with life's natural ebbs. Poseidon, the restless sea, no longer attacks ships capriciously. His waves teach moderation and awareness. The ocean moves slowly, and humans learn to respect forces larger than themselves, pacing ambition instead of rushing recklessly. Athena, once the strategist, embodies quiet problem-solving. Wisdom is not shouted, it is applied in small increments. Decisions made carefully ripple outward long after the initial action, proving that understanding often works best when it moves gradually. Apollo, the god of the sun and of prophecy, becomes a symbol of structure. Day follows night, patterns emerge. Dreams carry meaning when left undisturbed. Humans begin to see that illumination can be gentle, measured, and consistent. Artemis, silent and distant, teaches observation and restraint. She does not interfere. She does not demand. She moves alongside the world, reminding all that patience can be active without being loud. Even Dionysus, known for wildness, tempers excess through rhythm. Celebration is brief. Release is temporary. The human mind learns that joy need not disrupt sleep, that delight can exist in moderation, and that chaos can serve reflection when contained. Hypnos, the god of sleep, now works uninterrupted. Dreams weave slowly, layering narrative fragments without urgency. Humans learn to process thoughts gently through patterns, repetition, and reflection. Anxiety is soothed not by removal, but by rhythm. The fates, Moirai, continue their weaving, but now humans participate unconsciously. Each choice, each delay, each small step is a thread. Life stretches across generations in steady cadence, not abrupt leaps. In this calm era, humans finally understand a subtle truth. The world is not chaotic. It is structured, cyclical, and enduring, even when the pace seems imperceptible. The gods do not disappear. They merely teach indirectly, through the repetition of natural law and the rhythm of life. Sleep becomes deeper.
The mind rests not because the world is simplified, but because the mind itself has learned to follow patterns established over centuries. Myths are no longer stories to memorize. They are the architecture of rest, quietly scaffolding the human imagination. And in the quiet spaces between day and night, humans dream, not of monsters, not of wars, not of urgent quests. They dream of cycles, balance, patience, and return. The myths have become guides, not to action, but to calm, not to heroism, but to understanding, not to fame, but to rest. And so the world continues in its slow, measured rhythm. The gods watch, the earth waits, and sleep finally returns as it always intended, to be uninterrupted, deep, and gentle.
And so, after centuries of quiet observation, delay, and adjustment, myths settle into their final form, not as stories to act upon, but as rhythms to follow. The earth spins, seasons arrive in order, rivers flow, sometimes slowly, sometimes with gentle force, but always predictably. The sun rises and falls, night comes without complaint, stars shine steadily, indifferent to human haste. Humans walk through this rhythm, carrying fragments of stories their ancestors once told aloud. They may not recall the full details, but the patterns remain. The lessons once enforced by gods now exist in the cadence of life itself. When a child sleeps under a tree, the lull of wind mimics the voice of Hypnos. When a farmer observes the planting and the harvest, Demeter's patience is felt in each careful hand movement. The sea laps the shore with Poseidon's steady reminder of limits. Even chaos, once Typhon, now exists as impermanence, a quiet lesson that nothing lasts without change. The old monsters, once frightening, have receded into metaphor. They live now only in the shapes of problems humans encounter: illness, uncertainty, struggle, loss. And each challenge, though still real, carries order within it, as if carefully placed to teach endurance, attention, and calm. Heroes, too, have become gentle guides. Odysseus walks not as a warrior, but as a traveler of experience. His journey is long, filled with delays, but it is measured. Each obstacle teaches caution, observation, and patience. His return to Ithaca is less triumph and more quiet reconciliation with the passage of time. The myths at last rest alongside humans. They are no longer tools of fear or ambition. They are companions of calm, gentle teachers in the night, guardians of memory and pattern, guides for the unhurried mind. And as the last light fades each day and the first stars pierce the twilight, a single truth remains. The world is older than urgency. Time is patient. Sleep is eternal. And the stories, once loud, now whisper softly, forever, guiding without interference, settling without drama, resting as quietly as the earth itself. After the age of heroes, after the war and the long wanderings, life settled into routines so calm that they were nearly imperceptible. Villages grew slowly. Stones were stacked for houses without ceremony. Fields were planted and harvested according to patterns remembered from centuries of observation. Rivers were traced with care. Children learned by repetition rather than urgency. The rhythm of life itself became the teacher. Humans did not rush. They woke with the sun, worked with patience, and rested without worry. Each day was a small continuation of the last, unremarkable yet infinitely valuable. And the gods were present, quietly. Hestia, tending the hearth, reminded households to maintain warmth and stability. Her presence was not felt in flash or demand, but in the small acts of care that sustained families. Hermes, formerly the messenger and trickster, became the guide of transitions. He ensured that movement, whether of people, goods, or ideas, was smooth, without obstruction. His mischief was minimal, appearing only in subtle shifts, small lessons for attention and mindfulness. Demeter watched crops, ensuring cycles were intact. Seasons came and went with neither haste nor delay. Humans began to understand that time itself was a teacher, and that patience often bore the sweetest reward. Even when storms struck, they were no longer messages of anger. Poseidon reminded humans of limits, of preparation, of acceptance. The waves rose, they fell, and life continued. Mortals learned to approach the gods not as masters of fate, but as guides of process. They no longer built temples seeking intervention. They observed the patterns embedded in daily life. The wind, the sun, the tides, all were lessons in rhythm, in persistence, in quiet understanding. Sleep became the sanctuary for learning. Without immediate danger, the mind wandered gently through the old stories. Dreams carried fragments of Odysseus's travels, the wisdom of Athena, the patience of Demeter. Even memory itself became cyclical. Humans remembered to forget and forgot to remember, all in ways that allowed their minds to rest while still learning. And in the quiet of night, as lanterns burned low and fields lay empty, a single truth spread across all humans, old and young. Life is not a race. Life is a rhythm. The myths, once loud and demanding, had become silent teachers, and sleep, finally, arrived without hesitation. In the centuries that followed, the gods no longer walked among humans in physical form. They existed instead as principles, quiet reminders woven into the fabric of daily life, subtle influences that guided without interference. Each Olympian took on a new meditative role, shaping human thought and behavior through gentle example rather than command. Zeus, once the thunderer and king of the gods, became a symbol of measured judgment. He no longer threw lightning, nor did he demand obedience. Instead, he represented balance, the understanding that decisions take time and that power is best exercised with patience. To see the sky clear after a storm was to witness Zeus' calm authority. The world does not collapse, it persists. Hera, who had once been jealous and exacting, now embodied commitment and constancy. She guided humans through the quiet maintenance of relationships. Marriage, friendship, familial bonds, all were reflections of her gentle insistence that trust and loyalty require care over time, not sudden declarations of passion. Demeter remained the embodiment of cycles. She was visible in the turning of seasons, the planting of fields, the careful tending of animals. Humans learned that patience produces sustenance and that life unfolds according to rhythms larger than themselves. Each harvest became a meditation, each seed planted a quiet acknowledgement of continuity. Poseidon retained his association with water, but now he represented limits and adaptation. Storms, floods, and tides reminded humans to move carefully, to anticipate the inevitable ebb and flow. His lessons were not fearsome, they were instructive. The sea itself became a tutor, slow, persistent, and reliable. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, encouraged thoughtful problem-solving. She no longer inspired warriors to battle, but minds to observe, reflect, and plan. Her guidance was subtle, a pause before action, a careful weighing of consequences. She taught that the most effective solution is often the one that requires the least disruption. Apollo, once the radiant god of prophecy and light, became a symbol of clarity and structure. He was present in the steady sunrise, in the predictability of day following night, in the rhythm of breathing and walking. His influence reminded humans that understanding unfolds gradually, and that illumination comes with patience, not urgency. Artemis, once the untamed huntress, was now a guide of observation, solitude, and restraint. She taught humans the value of listening, watching, and moving quietly. There was strength in stillness, she demonstrated, and wisdom in waiting. Ares, traditionally the god of war, had shifted too. He now embodied controlled action rather than chaos. Conflict could exist without destruction. Disagreement could teach endurance and resilience. His lessons were slow, measured, and deliberate, like the careful sharpening of tools rather than sudden explosions of violence. Dionysus, finally, remained the symbol of release, but moderated. Joy, celebration, and movement were temporary, measured, and restorative. He taught that pleasure does not demand excess, and that release is most effective when it is brief, quiet, and intentional. Hestia, the goddess of hearth and home, perhaps the most subtle of all, embodied continuity. The warmth of fire, the order of household tasks, the quiet care of others, all of these were reflections of her influence. She reminded humans that stability, routine, and rest are the foundations of all life. In this quiet age, humans began to understand that gods were not distant rulers, nor were they capricious forces of fear. They were companions in subtle guidance. They were patterns within the world, principles to observe, echoes of the natural order. Sleep, too, changed under their influence. Dreams carried fragments of these principles, often as symbols rather than events. A rising sun might become Apollo's lesson in clarity. A calm river might carry Poseidon's instruction in patience. A small celebration with friends echoed Dionysus's gentle reminder that joy is restorative. Humans learned slowly that life could be approached without urgency, that every day contains patterns, every night offers rest, and every cycle, however small, carries its own guidance. The Olympians no longer demanded attention. They waited in quiet, persistent influence, teaching humanity through observation, reflection, and gentle repetition. And in this long, slow age, sleep became deep and untroubled. Mind and body rested, guided by rhythms older than memory, older than thought, even older than history itself.
Pandora's story is often told as a caution, but in truth it is a lesson in observation, delay, and careful reflection. She was created not as a trick, nor as a punishment, but as a reminder that curiosity is natural, but must be approached with patience. Her hands carried a jar. Inside it, carefully stored, were the unknown forces of life: difficulty, misfortune, aging, illness. These were not horrors, they were realities to be understood slowly. For many days, Pandora lived quietly among humans. She did not rush. She observed. She noticed patterns in behavior, how humans prepared for hardship, how they remembered past lessons, how they slept to recover strength. Her presence was calming. The moment came when the jar was opened, not violently, but gradually, naturally, as all small curiosities do. One by one, the contents drifted into the world. Illness did not strike suddenly. It moved through communities slowly, teaching care and attention. Aging arrived quietly, reminding humans that time itself is measured, not abrupt. Uncertainty became a companion, showing that patience and observation are more reliable than control. And hope remained inside the jar, patiently waiting, not as a reward, but as a guide. It showed humans that even amidst challenges, there is continuity, cycles, and the opportunity for reflection. Pandora herself learned with humans. She watched how they adapted, how they incorporated the new conditions into daily life without panic, how they rested despite difficulties. Her story, retold across generations, became a gentle narrative, not of blame, not of sin, not of punishment, but of timing and endurance. In sleep, humans remember fragments. Dreams carry the pattern of the jar opening. They do not relive misfortune directly, but understand indirectly that life unfolds in measured ways. One must approach the unknown slowly, absorb what is manageable, and rest between insights. Pandora's lesson, centuries later, continues to settle in the mind as humans close their eyes. Curiosity is natural, patience is essential, and hope is always present, quietly, in the spaces left untouched by haste. If you want, Part 13 can continue with Prometheus and the slow gift of fire, another long, calm, sleep-inducing retelling of a Greek myth with a focus on observation, delay, and the quiet unfolding of human knowledge.
Prometheus is often remembered for defiance, for daring to steal fire from the gods. Yet, in the quiet retelling, his story is less about rebellion and more about careful timing, measured thought, and gradual empowerment. When he first observed humans, he noticed their fragility. Their hands were capable, yet unpracticed. Their minds could understand, but not fully anticipate. Their nights were cold, their meals raw, and their sleep unprotected. Prometheus did not act suddenly. He watched, he waited. He considered how the smallest action could have the largest, longest-lasting effect. When he brought fire, he did not simply throw a flame into human hands. He ensured it could be managed, contained, and preserved. He taught them to kindle it slowly, to nurture it like a living thing, to respect its potential for both warmth and destruction. Humans did not leap immediately into brilliance. They practiced, they observed, they learned to cook, to warm, to gather, and to remain vigilant. Fire became a rhythm, a slow addition to the natural cycles of life. Its light lengthened the day without stealing sleep. Its warmth allowed comfort without carelessness. Zeus, who might have punished rashly, observed instead. He noted that Prometheus's actions were deliberate, and their consequences unfolded over time. Human innovation was not immediate. Missteps occurred, but gradually lessons were integrated. When Zeus imposed his punishment, it was long and methodical. Prometheus was bound, not crushed. Each day an eagle consumed his liver, only for it to regenerate by night. This was less torment than a continuing demonstration of endurance, resilience, and renewal. Through this slow cycle, humans learned indirectly. They learned that gifts come with responsibility, that progress requires care, that observation is as important as action, that cycles, pain, recovery, adaptation are natural. Sleep during this time reflected the rhythms of Prometheus's gift. Fire allowed nights to extend, but also reminded humans to pause. Dreams became lessons in attention and foresight, not chaos. They imagined flame moving slowly, spreading warmth, illuminating corners of knowledge bit by bit, rather than rushing in a sudden blaze. Prometheus's story, in its full quietness, is a meditation on deliberate empowerment. It is not about dramatic triumph. It is about slow growth, the accumulation of understanding, and the patient unfolding of human capability. And as humans lay down to sleep, they carried the warmth of his gift in their hands, the lesson of patience in their minds, and the quiet presence of endurance in their dreams.
Odysseus's return from Troy is often recounted as epic, fast-paced, and filled with peril. But in this retelling, it is a gradual meditation on endurance, observation, and reflection, a journey measured not in battles, but in the passing of time. After leaving Troy, Odysseus did not rush. He moved carefully across the sea, aware of the patterns of wind and current. Each island he encountered offered lessons in patience. Some islands were calm, with friendly inhabitants who shared meals and conversation. Other islands were isolated, quiet, empty, allowing reflection and the slow gathering of experience. At the land of the Lotus Eaters, his men were offered a plant that caused forgetfulness. This was not an act of danger, but of choice and observation. The human mind, when lulled into comfort, forgets its purpose. Odysseus guided his men gently back to awareness, teaching them that vigilance and memory are exercises of patience. The encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops, was not a clash of heroes, but a study in restraint and strategy. Odysseus avoided direct confrontation. He observed. He waited. He acted only when necessary and with precision. The lesson was that care, timing, and reflection often succeed where force alone would fail. Circe, the enchantress, did not imprison Odysseus's men arbitrarily. She transformed them into animals, simplifying their needs and slowing their impulses. Time passed slowly there, almost a year, teaching Odysseus the value of delayed action and consideration. Patience became a form of safety. In the underworld, Odysseus encountered shades of the dead. They spoke without urgency. Their counsel was reflective, offering perspective on life, loss, and the enduring cycles of existence. There was no drama, only quiet understanding, teaching that wisdom comes from attention and careful listening. The sirens, their song famous for its allure, were not danger incarnate, but an illustration of distraction. Odysseus listened while restrained, showing that the mind can engage with temptation and still remain grounded, learning to observe without surrendering control. Scylla and Charybdis were not monsters, but tests of endurance and measured choice. Loss is inevitable. The journey teaches humans how to act with awareness and adapt to conditions beyond their control. Every movement is deliberate. Every decision carries consequences tempered by patience. Calypso offered immortality and ease. Odysseus's delay on her island was not misfortune, but a period of reflection. He learned the value of waiting, of appreciating comfort while preparing for eventual continuation. Finally, when he reached Ithaca, the return was quiet. No grand fanfare, no overwhelming triumph, just slow recognition, restoration of household rhythms, and the resumption of everyday life. Even Penelope's weaving, delayed and repeated daily, mirrored the patient pattern of the journey itself. Odysseus's story, retold in this slow rhythm, becomes a meditation. Every step, every encounter, every pause is a lesson in endurance, careful observation, and the accumulation of quiet wisdom. Sleep after such a journey is deep and restorative. Dreams replay the long paths taken,
the calm encounters, the careful timing of decisions. The mind rests, guided by the pattern of experience rather than the thrill of danger. Odysseus teaches not heroism or conquest, but the value of living deliberately, observing patiently, and moving through the world without unnecessary haste.
The fall of Troy did not immediately end the world, nor did it conclude human concern. Its echoes stretched over years, decades, even lifetimes, but always in a gradual, measured way. Survivors wandered slowly, carrying their experiences like tools for reflection. Some, like Menelaus, returned to Sparta, not with glory, but with the quiet labor of restoration. Rebuilding a home, reestablishing routines, tending to people, livestock, and land. All these acts were ordinary, repetitive, and profoundly shaping. Others, like Helen, did not exist as symbols of beauty or desire in this telling, but as examples of continuity and patience. She moved through life observing, mediating, and preserving stability. There was no haste, no need for dramatic confrontations. Her presence was steady, teaching that restoration comes gradually, not in bursts of drama. The cities surrounding Troy, long abandoned or ravaged by war, recovered slowly. Fields regrew, waterways cleared, walls were repaired. This process, though silent, required observation, attention, and time. Humans learned again and again that endurance is more valuable than immediate triumph. The gods observed from a distance. They did not interfere dramatically. Apollo allowed understanding to emerge naturally, guiding minds toward insight without demand. Athena offered subtle wisdom to strategists, scholars, and farmers alike. Poseidon reminded those traveling by sea that patience is as essential as skill. Even Ares and Dionysus, once agents of conflict and frenzy, now served as gentle reminders. Every challenge or celebration should be approached deliberately. Sleep returned to humans as a vital rhythm. Dreams replayed the slow unfolding of events, teaching reflection, cause and effect, and the quiet consequences of choices. Those who had experienced war remembered not through trauma alone, but through pattern, repetition, and enduring structure. The Trojan War, often told as a story of sudden heroism and rapid battles, becomes in this retelling a long meditation on cause, patience, and consequence. Heroes are remembered less for their acts of strength and more for their endurance, their careful observation, and their gradual restoration of order. Even the minor figures, often lost in the noise of epic retellings, are seen here as participants in a slow network of human experience. Each life, each return, each quiet act of rebuilding contributes to a vast pattern of stability. The world settles. Communities thrive slowly, intentionally. Human understanding deepens. Sleep grows calm and restorative, guided by the rhythms of recovery rather than the chaos of conflict. The myths themselves, once alive in the chaos of action, now serve as frameworks for reflection, teaching humans that time, patience, and careful observation are the true sources of endurance. And in the long nights, as the stars wheel across the sky and the wind whispers through trees and over rivers, humans rest. Dreams carry the lessons of Troy, not as trauma, but as guidance. Move slowly, observe carefully, endure steadily, and allow the world to unfold around you. Beyond the great heroes and the wars, there are countless smaller stories. Myths often overlooked, yet no less instructive. In this calm retelling, they become subtle guides for observation, patience, and reflection, perfect for the rhythm of sleep. Baucis and Philemon, an elderly couple, lived quietly in their humble cottage. When strangers arrived, gods in disguise, they offered hospitality without question or hurry. They did not seek recognition, nor did they act from ambition. Their reward was the slow, natural unfolding of life, a transformed home, a blessing not demanded but quietly received. Their story teaches that kindness and attention in small acts create enduring harmony. Phaethon, who tried to drive the sun chariot, did so not recklessly, but with inexperience and curiosity. His lesson in this gentle version is not tragedy alone, but the importance of guidance and observation. Humans are reminded that ambition without preparation can disturb natural cycles, and that learning takes time. Daedalus, the master craftsman, worked patiently, not in sudden bursts of genius, but through careful experimentation and reflection. His labyrinth was intricate not to trap, but to teach spatial awareness, discipline, and the consequences of human ingenuity. Icarus, too, in flying too high, offers a quiet warning. Heed limits and move gradually, for unchecked desire can disturb balance. Arachne, once proud in her weaving, teaches a subtle lesson about focus and humility. Perfection is admirable, but it is also better approached slowly. Skill unfolds over time. Skill without patience leads to tension and disappointment. Even the stories of the natural world, the nymphs, river gods, and spirits of forests are not fantastical intrusions. They are patterns embedded in the environment, gently urging humans to notice rhythm, cycles, and the passage of time. Rivers flow, winds shift, and seasons change, all teaching awareness and quiet attentiveness. In sleep, these minor myths replay as soft simulations of life lessons. Dreams carry the logic of attention, generosity, caution, patience, humility, observation. Danger is rarely immediate, learning is gradual. Each story threads into the others. Together they create a tapestry of slow wisdom. Humans awake not startled or anxious, but guided by the invisible hand of pattern and principle. The gods in these stories remain distant but present. Instead, they exist as quiet signposts, principles embodied in myth, whispering lessons to the attentive mind. And as the night deepens, as humans sink into rest, these stories serve their final purpose: to slow the mind, to organize thought without rush, to allow dreams to carry insight in fragments, softly, gently, to teach without demanding action. Sleep becomes full, deep, restorative. The body rests, the mind integrates patterns. The world continues its slow, steady rotation, carrying humans forward along gentle rhythms set long ago by gods, heroes, and minor figures alike.
As centuries passed, Greek myths did not vanish. They traveled slowly, adapting and settling into new lands, new cultures, and new minds. The Romans inherited them, not to worship in the same way, but to organize, translate, and preserve. Zeus became Jupiter, still a figure of authority, but more abstract, more distant. Hera became Juno, guiding relationships and social bonds subtly, rather than through personal intervention. Athena became Minerva, wisdom applied to law, strategy, and civic responsibility. Ares became Mars, still associated with conflict, but now tempered with order.
The Romans appreciated structure. They did not need drama or constant divine interference. Myths were reorganized to fit human governance, urban life, and societal rhythm. Temples were built not to witness acts of gods, but to anchor daily life in familiar cycles. Festivals reminded humans of patterns, harvests, seasons, rites of passage, without urgency or fear. The myths continued to serve a gentle purpose. Heroes like Odysseus, Perseus, and Heracles were preserved as examples of endurance, cleverness, and measured action rather than conquest. Their adventures were slowed, retold in ways that emphasized reflection over heroism, planning over battle, and timing over impulse. Even minor myths traveled. The story of Cincinnatus, later inspired by Greek ideals, illustrated calm leadership and duty without ambition. Baucis and Philemon endured a steadfast hospitality, reminding humans that small, patient actions carry long-term rewards. As the Roman Empire expanded, myths followed. Roads, markets, and settlements spread them gradually. Each new community adapted them. Local rivers, mountains, and forests were incorporated into the stories. Gods became metaphors, sometimes hidden in local traditions, waiting to teach observation, patience, and endurance. Sleep, too, evolved under this slow cultural spread. Dreams incorporated myths from different regions, blending Greek and Roman patterns. Humans learned from these combinations: patience across cultures, observation across generations, the recognition of recurring rhythms, no matter the place. Even when Rome declined, myths survived. They were preserved in manuscripts, copied slowly by monks, studied quietly in cloisters. They were no longer urgent. They were reflections for thought, guides for calm, and companions for sleep. The gods, by now, existed almost entirely as principles embedded in human experience. They no longer walked the earth, but they were present in rhythm, in pattern, in the steady unfolding of life. Through this slow, quiet journey, myths became timeless teachers. They no longer demanded attention. They waited patiently in stories, symbols, and phrases, ready to guide the mind toward calm understanding whenever needed. And humans slept, carrying these lessons into the night. Observe, endure, reflect, and rest. After the fall of Rome, Greek and Roman myths did not vanish. They retreated into manuscripts, cloisters, and quiet study, carried slowly by scribes who copied each letter with care. In monasteries, myths became part of the rhythm of life, not urgent lessons, but gentle exercises in memory, observation, and reflection. Heroes and gods were no longer literal beings. They became allegories, symbols of moral, ethical, and natural principles. Odysseus was no longer a man battling monsters. He became the patient navigator of the human mind, moving carefully through obstacles, understanding his limits, and learning to endure delays without despair. Prometheus, the bringer of fire, became a quiet guide for human ingenuity. The gift of fire, knowledge, creativity, and foresight was no longer dangerous, but a principle to cultivate slowly, with attention and care. Pandora's jar was not a trap, but a meditation. Even when challenges appear, hope remains inside, waiting quietly. During the Renaissance, myths were revived with fascination. Artists painted gods and heroes not as threatening figures, but as representations of human qualities. Venus became beauty expressed in proportion. Apollo became harmony and order.
Athena became strategy and reasoning. Each work of art slowed observation, inviting viewers to meditate on balance, form, and reflection. Writers retold the stories slowly. Epics were studied, dissected, and compared. Poets extended the narratives, filling gaps with reflection rather than drama. The mind, guided by these stories, learned the rhythm of caution, endurance, and attentive observation. Even in literature intended for amusement, the slow lessons persisted. Myth became a gentle architecture of imagination, a framework for understanding human behavior, nature, and the passage of time. These stories carried principles of endurance, careful action, and reflection through centuries, preparing the human mind for rest rather than excitement. Sleep remained intertwined with myth. Dreams incorporated the slow patterns, the measured journey of Odysseus, the careful guidance of Athena, the enduring patience of Demeter. Humans rested better because the stories taught not urgency, but the value of rhythm, reflection, and continuity. The gods had become quiet teachers. They existed in language, in art, in ritualized remembrance, guiding without interference, shaping understanding without command. And in the long nights of medieval villages, Renaissance courts, and quiet study chambers, humans slept, carrying forward the slow wisdom of the myths. Observe, endure, reflect, rest, and trust the unfolding of time.
By the time the modern era arrived, Greek and Roman myths no longer required temples, sacrifices, or epic recitations. Yet they did not vanish. They settled quietly into language, literature, and thought, continuing to guide humans subtly. Expressions such as an Achilles' heel or a Herculean task carry centuries of mythic wisdom. They are reminders that vulnerability and endurance coexist, that effort is measured, and that human challenges unfold gradually. The stories live not in spectacle, but in patterned language. Novels, plays, and poems retold these myths, emphasizing human psychology and moral reflection rather than battles or divine intervention. Odysseus became an archetype of patience and problem-solving. Prometheus symbolized foresight, ingenuity, and responsibility. Pandora illustrated curiosity, tempered with acceptance and hope. Even in daily life, the principles of the myths remain: waiting for crops to grow, observing weather, reflecting on decisions. These ordinary acts echoed Demeter, Zeus, and Athena. Joy and celebration, structured and moderated, reflect Dionysus. Calm endurance mirrors the slow journey of heroes past. Sleep in the modern world is still influenced by myth, though unconsciously. Dreams often incorporate fragments of journeys, puzzles, moral choices, or challenges, tiny Odyssean passages, quiet reminders of problem-solving, patience, and reflection. Night after night, the mind rehearses these lessons, integrating them into a calm sense of continuity. Even scientific study, philosophy, and art retain mythic patterns. The universe is explored like a labyrinth, curiosity is cultivated like fire, and human experience is mapped as a series of measured journeys through uncertainty. Myth does not instruct in commands, it instructs through pattern, rhythm, and observation, always guiding without interruption. In modern classrooms, libraries, or living rooms, the echoes persist. Stories of gods, heroes, and monsters no longer demand belief, but offer structure for understanding, calm, and reflection. And in quiet homes, as evening descends, as lamps dim, and as the world slows, these myths return, not loudly, not urgently,
but softly, like a gentle rhythm under the surface of thought. Humans sleep. They dream. They are guided by principles of patience, reflection, endurance, and hope, all distilled from centuries of myths retold in increasingly quiet, gentle forms. The stories have finally achieved their purpose, not to entertain, not to frighten, but to prepare the human mind to rest, to teach without pressure, and to allow sleep to occur as deeply and peacefully as possible. Now, at last, all the stories converge, not as separate tales of gods, heroes, and mortals, but as a single, continuous rhythm designed for reflection, calm, and sleep. The earth rotates slowly. The sun rises and falls, each day following the last in measured pattern. Rivers flow with quiet persistence, winds whisper through trees, and the stars wheel overhead with timeless patience. This is the rhythm the myths have always reflected. Odysseus travels once more, slowly, across the calm sea. Each wave moves like a gentle hand, guiding him, teaching him, reminding him and the listener that the journey matters more than the destination. Each delay, each pause, each moment of observation is a lesson in endurance and awareness. Prometheus rests, no longer punished, holding fire carefully in his hands. The flame warms without haste, illuminating understanding and creativity. It spreads slowly, deliberately, teaching patience and careful action. Pandora opens her jar not in panic, but with curiosity tempered by reflection. Misfortune drifts gently into the world, but so does hope, quietly, steadily, softly, reminding humans that even the small, difficult moments are accompanied by the promise of renewal. Demeter walks through fields of wheat, teaching rhythm through growth. Poseidon moves through oceans, reminding humans that limits exist and that obedience to pattern is wiser than haste. Athena observes quietly, offering insight without command. Dionysus whispers lessons in measured joy, while Hestia nurtures hearth and home, stability and comfort, so the world can rest. Even the minor myths, the stories of Bacchus and Philemon, Daedalus and Icarus, unfold with calm deliberation. Each choice, each act, each small reflection reinforces a single truth. The world is structured, the mind can rest, and wisdom grows through observation and patience. Time slows. The war of Troy recedes into gentle reflection. The travels of heroes become meditative exercises. Gods exist in principles rather than presence, guiding without interference. Mortals move deliberately, resting when necessary, observing, enduring, reflecting. And now, as the night deepens, sleep flows uninterrupted. The mind integrates lessons gently. Patience from Odysseus's journey, care from Prometheus's fire, hope from Pandora's jar, rhythm from Demeter's cycles, observation from Athena's wisdom, joy from Dionysus's moderation, stability from Hestia's hearth. The stories whisper softly in every heartbeat, in every exhale, in every shadow of the night. And as humans rest, dreams unfold, carrying the patterns, lessons, and rhythms of ancient myths, all slowed, all softened, all structured for calm. In this final moment, the world itself seems to breathe, slow, deep, unhurried. The myths are no longer tales to act upon. They are companions for the mind,
gentle guides in the night, threads of wisdom woven into the quiet architecture of rest. Sleep is complete, the night is long, the myths endure, and all is calm.